Hi, I'm Delana Sepko, and you're listening to Aye Lassie, the programme that celebrates the history and achievements of Scottish women. In this episode, we're looking at sport, female athletes, and how over the years, Scots women have helped smash the barriers preventing them from participating. So stretch, get your sweatbands on, and get ready to feel the burn of fierce Scottish lassies. To me and my female pals, it seems completely normal for us to head off to the gym or join a sports team, but it hasn't always been so easy. Just over 100 years ago, women all over the Western world were held to strict social and medical standards of womanhood and femininity. Little by little, countless women challenged expectations, some in small, unassuming ways, others with great shows of accomplishment. Today, we enjoy the benefits of their bravery, but in order to know how far we've come, we need to know where we started. Some of the first recorded instances of Scottish women playing football are found buried deep in church registers. One such record, from Carstairs in Lanarkshire, describes an instance in the early 1620s of men and women playing football, and was probably noted because they were breaking the Sabbath. In fact, there are some researchers who suggest that women's football started in Scotland, and their suggestion is based on records from the late 1700s, showing an annual women's match in Midlothian, as well as fisherwomen from Musselburgh and Inveresk playing against each other. The first recorded England versus Scotland women's match was held in Edinburgh in 1881. The Glasgow News reported, "An innovation in football playing has been commenced in Edinburgh, a game having been played there on Saturday by a set of girls calling themselves international teams, representing England and Scotland. We need not comment on the character of the performance they gave, but must, in the interests of public morals, protect against the institution of an exhibition which can hardly be called decent, and which is evidently got up to draw the shillings of the crowd. There can be no other possible reason for this outrageous exhibition than gain. Football is not a game for women, and the spectacle of a score of girls careening about a field in knickerbockers is not to be defended on any ground of public utility. There is some talk of these international players giving a performance in Glasgow, so that the authorities there should consider whether some means may not be devised for checking a scandalous enterprise." The reporter's disgust is clear, and I wish I could say that this was just one man's opinion, but it wasn't. It wasn't even a male perspective on women playing football. Along with football, women were taking up all sorts of sports and physical activities, including cycling, tennis, sailing, and horse riding, and there were fiercely drawn lines between those who supported this revolution in female physical activity and those who thought it damaged a woman's body and the social norms that separated men from women. Any women playing any sport or taking up so-called inappropriate exercise was subjected to mockery and disdain like that shown by the reporter. Much like the lassies playing football, other Scottish women faced resistance. Publishing the article Modern Mannish Maidens in 1890, the anonymous author goes to great lengths to discuss the horrifying trend of women taking up sport. The author asks, "What means this modern craze for mannish sports and mannish ways, which has of late seized upon a certain section of young women in polite society? What are the reasonable limits that should be set to the pastimes of womankind?" Again, we hear about limiting what and how women could play sport, because of the fear it would strip them of their femininity. Victorians thought women shouldn't be flushed or sweaty from vigorous movement, nor were they to have muscles. Women were supposed to be graceful, agile, and supple, not strong, and certainly not competitive. One of the main reasons men and some women objected to women playing sport is because the effects of exercise were considered mannish. how was a woman supposed to get and keep a husband if she didn't look or behave like a woman? The anonymous author put it this way: if there be one unwritten axiom that the universal custom of civilized communities has stereotyped into recognition, it is that the gentler sex must, on all occasions, consult appearances in a special manner not demanded of men. It is, or was, not only de rigueur in society that women should try to look her best. It is, or ought to be, an instinct with herself. If she be very woman, it would seem not possible that she could under any circumstances consent to exhibit herself in an ungainly manner before the world, least of all before men. She will never, one would think, willingly and consciously thus do herself less than justice. Yet, strange to say, and we say it with regret, a fashion has of late set in which condones her doing this, and in certain circles, which should know better, she is allowed to do it. Some sports, like ice skating and horse riding, were considered okay for women because men thought they looked good doing them, while golf, croquet, and badminton were fine even though they weren't as pleasing for men to watch. Other sports like hockey, football, and boxing were thought too masculine, too aggressive, or too competitive for women. The fear of women becoming mannish wasn't just felt by men. Some women were equally outraged. In 1899, Dr. Arabella Keneally, a British female physician, started a row in the popular magazine The 19th Century over exactly this issue. Her article, Woman as an Athlete, surprisingly had almost no medical arguments, and instead was filled with emotional pleas in favor of womanhood. As it's been said, the employment of muscle in the achievement of some mental or moral idea is the highest possible expression of muscle. The subordination of muscle to mere muscular achievements holds a very inferior place in the scale of doing. The subordination of muscle to womanhood should ever be kept in mind as being an infinitely higher ideal than can ever be the subordination of womanhood to muscle. In addition to all the emotional arguments for femininity and womanhood, there were some medical arguments too. Women playing sport were thought to be jeopardizing their abilities to have children because exercise was thought to damage their reproductive organs. Cycling, which wasn't done side saddle like horse riding, was one such sport, and some thought it could harm a lady's... or so the logic went. But not every voice denied women a shot on the bicycle, and a lot of those voices belonged to women. For example, in 1896, W.H. Fenton wrote A Medical View of Cycling for Ladies, and in it she makes what would seem to us a contemporary, common-sense statement. Let it at once be said, an organically sound woman can cycle with as much impunity as a man. With cycles now perfected, there is nothing in the anatomy or the physiology of a woman to prevent their fully and freely enjoyed within the limits defined by common sense. But our Victorian ancestors didn't share our understanding of what a woman's body can and can't do. Rather than accept theories that the female physique was inherently weak and frail, Fenton suggested inexperience could be the cause. Bit by bit, as they have overcome this deep-rooted prejudice with regard to one physical recreation or another, women are proving that exercise, within the same limits, is just as beneficial to them as to men. It is true they are handicapped by dress, by the disuse of their muscular system for generations, and by the lack of the early training which every schoolboy has the benefit of. Despite objections and efforts to restrict women from taking up sport, women's golf proved both popular and relatively successful in Scotland. Perhaps the only sport more ingrained in Scottish culture than football, golf is truly the national pastime. It's difficult to point to golf's exact beginning, but there are records from 1502 of King James IV ordering a set of clubs from a bowmaker in Perth. And he wasn't the only royal rumoured to indulge. His granddaughter, Mary, Queen of Scots, was reportedly a keen golfer. But this claim is hard, if not impossible, to verify, because it was made by her enemies, and probably done to show her supposed callousness and suggest guilt for the murder of her husband, Lord Darnley, in 1567. Founded in 1754, the Royal and Ancient Golf Club in St Andrews is the oldest course in Scotland. Yet it wasn't until 1855 that a one Mrs. Wolfe Murray, wife of one of the St Andrews members, disregarded convention and took to what was considered the male-only territory of the links. In 1867, the Royal and Ancient became home to the St Andrews Ladies Golf Club, the first in the UK. At the time, golf was strictly an upper-class activity because of high demands for entry to private clubs. Potential female members needed to meet a number of criteria. They had to be related to a male member, they needed a suitable number of references, and pay an annual membership fee that was too steep for most. In addition, women were restricted to the caddies courses or putting greens and confined to separate areas of the clubhouse because these were not only places of leisure, but also places of business, men's business, and the women simply weren't welcome to join. Nonetheless, ladies' clubs formed across Scotland, including the Carnoustie Ladies Golf Club in 1873, the London Ladies Golf Club in 1890, and the Crail Ladies Golf Club in 1901. And notably, the Ladies Golf Union was formed in Scotland in 1893, making it one of the first British organisations dedicated to women's sport. So even though golf was available to women before most other sports, there were heavy social and financial constraints on their participation. Although the overwhelming majority disapproved of women playing sport, it didn't stop them. Like Fenton's case for female cyclists, Scotswoman Caroline Craik wrote about women learning to sail. Her 1896 publication, Sailing for Ladies in Highland Lochs, reads more like a how-to manual than a social or medical argument. Starting from the understanding that sailing without proper instruction is dangerous, she provides practical tips for women about how to safely sail a boat and some good life advice. No woman who is naturally awkward ought to be allowed to sail a boat herself. Neither should one who has not a strong sense of danger. But she must be strong of arm and cool of head. In short, she must be hardy without being foolhardy, and brave without being daring. Female athletes first competed in the 1900 Olympic Games in Paris, in events like lawn tennis and croquet. But it wasn't until the 1912 Games, held in Stockholm, that Govan's own Belle Moore became the first Scottish woman to medal as part of the British 4x100 metre freestyle relay. This was the first time women's swimming events were included in the Olympics, and although their world record was bettered by the Americans at the following Games, Moore, along with her 3 teammates, are the first and only British swimmers to claim a bronze in this event. Gradually, more and more women's events were added to the swimming program, as well as other categories like archery, figure skating, gymnastics, and athletics. But with each Olympics, some events would be added while others were removed. For example, after its debut in 1928, women's athletics were removed until 1960 because there were rumors the athletes collapsed after the 800-meter race, which raised fresh fears that female bodies couldn't handle the strain. Rather than test the theory again, the International Olympic Committee simply banned it. Competing under the saltire, Scotland has participated in every Commonwealth Games since it began in 1930. In the beginning, there were 6 events, and women were allowed to compete only in the swimming. Like the Olympics, the Empire Games, as the Commonwealth Games were first known, were finally providing women sporting opportunities, and Scottish women took full advantage of them. Scotland won 25 medals that first year in Hamilton, Canada, and Scots women snatched 3 of them. Margot Ann Hamilton earned a silver, and Jean McDowell earned a bronze for individual swimming events, and the women's 666-yard relay team won a bronze. Motherwell-born Nancy Rioch was something of a local swimming celebrity. She was the main feature at Motherwell Swimming Club's annual galas, and even received fan mail from servicemen. By 1947, at the age of 19, she already held 28 swimming records and was slated as the best British female hope for a medal in the 1948 London Olympics. Sadly, she never made it. During a competition in Monte Carlo, she contracted polio, fell unconscious while in the pool, and never woke up. Scotland had lost one of its brightest sporting stars, and her funeral proved that this accomplished athlete, no matter her gender, had won her nation's hearts when thousands of mourners accompanied her coffin to her grave in Airdrie. In the first half of the 20th century, there were no professional opportunities for women to play sports, so it was international events like the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games that finally gave female athletes the opportunities and recognition they were due. Now's probably the time to admit I was wrong. When I started researching this episode, I made an assumption. I assumed that because football is very popular in Scotland, and that because men's football is well supported, I assumed that women's football would also be popular and well supported. I was very wrong. As it turns out, the beginning of women playing football in Scotland isn't clear, and the histories of female footballers are patchy, underdeveloped, and sometimes hard to hear. I was very wrong indeed. But here to put me right is Karen Grunwell, a postgraduate researcher at the University of Stirling, who's researching the history of Scottish women's football from 1960 onwards. Women were playing football before the 60s, so why start there?
When I started the PhD, we had been looking at the history of women's football in Scotland full stop. Earliest mention of football in Scotland with women is 1628.
Okay.
So that's quite a long period
Yes.
to look at. And very little record. So there's something in 1628, then there's a little bit in 1795, and then you go up into 1881.
Okay.
So kind of there's big gaps.
Patchy.
Patchy, absolutely. And it gets patchier, bizarrely, 30s, 40s, 50s. That's less known about that than some of the matches in 1881. So it's kind of difficult out there. So we looked and we said, let's go for where we can do interviews and oral history discussions with individual women and men who've been involved.
Yeah.
So we refined it to 1960 to date. So that allowed me to start talking to some women. At the time of the period that I'm looking at, the start of it, women's football has lots of restrictions placed on it. So the Scottish Football Association have said women can't play or use the facilities of any club that's affiliated to us. They can't use referees who work for us. They can't do any of that. So women's football was ignored. It wasn't hidden because there were lots of women playing it. Well, not lots, but a good number of women playing it. But it was something that the women weren't particularly used to celebrating. They loved, but people didn't ask them about it. You know, the press wasn't that interested. There's the odd thing here and there. So the women haven't been used to kind of celebrating it, because even in 1974, when Scotland were forced, and I use that word quite strongly, they were forced to change their rules. They didn't support women's football, so it was allowed but certainly not encouraged. So again, the women weren't used to kind of interest in what they were doing.
I mean, when you talk about the sort of the restrictions that were placed on women's football in Scotland, part of trying to educate myself after my massive shock was finding out about kind of the ban on women's football, and that it was a ban across the whole of the UK
and Europe.
So it wasn't just specific to Scotland, although maybe the attitudes in different places were nuanced. But it went all the way back to 1921.
So Scotland's got a slightly different history. It's 1947 that it actually formally restricts this, although it kind of plays to the ban earlier. But basically it started in England, and as England's FA was seen as the kind of the
authority.
Yeah, I suppose that's the word.
Influencer.
Yeah, the influencer. It went across Europe from there. Women's football became incredibly popular in the First World War because men's football wasn't being played, because it was seen inappropriate to have men's football being played while men were fighting. So women's football became a thing, partly because they'd all gone into the factories, and factories saw football as a good way to keep people fit and to encourage teamwork. And then they thought, we could raise money and help morale by having matches between the teams in the factories. This grew to the extent that on the Boxing Day 1921, 2 teams in England played to a crowd of 53,000 at Everton's ground, Goodison Park. And after that, it was seen that women's football wasn't going away, and as men's football was starting up, spectators weren't going to both. So the money to men's football was dropping because people were paying to see women's football.
Divided audience,
Absolutely.
Divided income.
Absolutely. So and it was the men who ran the Football Authority and who had businesses in football clubs thought, how do we stop this? Yeah. And they played the medical card, which was it would be medically unwise for women to keep playing. They're not strong enough. Let's forget what they did in the war, but they're not strong enough. It could have impacts on them, and it's all just a bit something we shouldn't approve of. So it was banned from using the facilities. That was upheld in Scotland, although not formally restricted until 1947, but that's partly how we know that women's football kept going, because there are letters in the SFA minutes, notes in the minutes where they've said to send a letter to X club because we understand they're letting women play on the ground again, so tell them not to. So that's the only way we've got records. We haven't got anything else, but that tells us that it kept going all the way through. So in particular, if you look at the 60s and 70s, then there's names like Elsie Cook, Rose Riley. Rose Riley is one that will come up on Wikipedia. I've met Margaret Macaulay Ray. She's very heavily involved across those times. Sheila Begbie, just trying to think, Jean Stevens, Janet Legg. So there's a number of people in that era who should be much more well known than they are. There's a woman called Edna Nellis who unfortunately has passed away, so I haven't been able to interview her, but she too was a phenomenal footballer who went to play abroad, but again it isn't mentioned very much. And Elsie Cook, for example, she's one of my heroines now in terms of her organisational ability and some of the stuff she did, so I hope to get to speak about her a bit more. But then you come into I think 80s is kind of almost the fallow period where there are very few names known, but there are lots of people who I've been interviewing who should have been known there. So, and now I'm just trying to think of some of the names, but like Emma Hunter and Kate Cooper, and then the people who went on to start up Glasgow City, so like Carol Ann Stewart. So there's some names there that we need to be building on, and that's one of my purposes, to kind of get some of those names out there.
To build up those narratives.
Absolutely, absolutely, because then you feed into the names that will ring bells for some people, like Julie Fleeting or Gemma Fay, and you start to move in, and then obviously you get into today's teams where it's much better known, but it's starting to get those names coming through from particularly the 80s, but some of the 70s as well. And it's then that when you look at the clubs that were around in the 60s, there were only a handful of them, but the clubs in the 60s all came from works organisations, so they were like the Sports and Social Club, and they had a women's football team. But then one of the best football teams who produced some of these great footballers was actually set up to play one of the works teams. So they weren't a works team, they were a group of women who played netball normally or other sports, but who happened to be really very good at football. So it kind of moved from there.
So far in your research, I know it's kind of hard not to have favourites when you're so engrossed and so embedded in a topic. But are there any women or events that you have found particularly inspiring? Yeah, there are. And you're right, it's really hard. And I was kind of thinking about this and thinking, I don't want to say names and then not say all the other names, but I have to go back to Elsie Cook. Phenomenal. She was good at football. It was her mum who got asked to set up this team to play the works team. And she was instrumental in keeping that team going. But it was her organisational skills that were incredible. And so then when Rose Riley, as a 9-year-old, wanted to play football, and she approached Elsie and she came to play for Sturton Thistle.
So she kept that going, and she got tours across Scotland, but also down into England, because at the time there were only 6 teams and they didn't all know each other existed. There wasn't a league at the beginning of the 60s. They just played whoever they could find. And we have to remember, no internet, no mobile phones. Most of the people didn't have phones in their own homes. They were ringing from phones on the corner of the street. So quite difficult to organise. And also that it wasn't supported. Obviously, come 1971, England had changed its mind and it did support women's football a little bit more. Elsie organised the first ever international, in inverted commas, between England and Scotland. Up until that time, if you'd said England and Scotland, it was a local team who came from England or Scotland and was then given that name. But this was the first time that it was women from all different clubs. So there were enough clubs playing by 1972 to get together a team in Scotland, who then worked to invite the English team up to play against us. So it's just that level of organisation, that keeping in touch with people, building connections. So Stuart and Thistle and Aberdeen North had been asked, Aberdeen Prima Donnas had been asked to join their English league as the Section North, in understatement of the year. But they actually got to go down and play in England, and some of the teams came up to play here, but more difficult because they couldn't use recognised football grounds, so they were playing on the local kind of park, etc. And Elsie would go out and paint the lines again and put the nets back up and sweep to make sure all the rubbish and all the horrendous things you can imagine that might have been on the park weren't there when they were playing football. So it's just that kind of, so I think there's a lot about those women then who just head down and just kept going and wouldn't take no for an answer. So I'm just trying to think, but then there are lots of women as you go through who've done exactly the same thing. As I say, Carol Ann and Laura, who started Glasgow City, which changed the face of women's football in Scotland. Some of the women who kept playing in the 80s, Sheila Begbie, who did amazing stuff. She was a great footballer, but then she went to work in sports administration and made sure that women and girls football was really properly funded and started to get on a proper footing in Scotland. So she was instrumental in a lot of changes. So lots of women along the way who've done incredible things.
One of the names that really stuck out for me was Rose Riley.
Yeah.
And simply because of the tenacity, the very thing that you said, in her just unwillingness to take no for an answer there, and in the sense that the logistics of being forbidden from, and it wasn't just access to any FA grounds, it was everything that came with it. So it was, you couldn't borrow the equipment, you couldn't access the referees or the linesmen. So it wasn't just about the pitch necessarily, it was about all the other things that came with it. And I read, I was listening to a radio show where yourself and Rose Riley, Margaret Macaulay Ray and Elsie Cook were involved as well, and just listening to her speak about what she did to make it happen.
Absolutely.
And it was about by hook or by crook. You find whatever you can to make the net. You find whoever you can rustle up to be a referee, and you just got on with it.
Absolutely.
And to me, that was I was really inspired by that.
But two of those women had extra things to kind of overcome. So Rose started playing at 9. Her parents were not very enthused about it. She was a great all-round athlete. There was chances, same with Sheila Begbie, for going on to go to the Commonwealth Games and things like that, but they were choosing football. Rose tells the story of being locked in her bedroom and learning how to shin out the window to get to play football. But her and Elsie then have a double whammy. So already, so the Scottish Football Association have just said, no, it's okay, we will recognise women's football and they can use the facilities. But the then very young Scottish Women's Football Association have a row around who their manager of the Scotland team should be. There's a bit of an uproar. There's a couple of different stories, but there's a bit of an uproar around it. And they actually ban Rose, Elsie and Edna for life from playing football in Scotland.
Ooh.
So as it happened, Rose was already in Italy and she didn't know about this ban. It was Elsie writing her a letter that told her, so she wasn't quite so worried. But for Edna and for Elsie, who was coaching girls' teams, she was never supposed to do that again. She did do it hiding behind curtains, but she wasn't supposed to. But yeah, you know, if you imagine Rose, she's 18, she's gone across to Italy. Can't speak the language. Sometimes the only conversation she has is with herself in the mirror when she's practicing her Italian. But her skill and her determination and her complete love of the game, that's all she wanted to do, just come through. And my favourite story of her, although it's not related to Scottish football as such, you know, apart from the fact that she captained Italy to the World Cup, which is good in itself, but she was so good. She was playing in Italy and her old French team said, we're struggling, could you come back and play for us? And they played on a different day, so Saturday and Sunday, so she split her week between France and Italy so she could play for both of them. And then at the end of the season, they both won the championship. So she was playing in two countries, in two teams that both won their league and the championship for that country. They were top teams in that country.
Are there any lessons that we can learn today from some of the women that you've encountered in your research?
I think so, absolutely. I think one of the big ones is don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something. You know, it's fascinating. It's a wonderful subject. I've only scratched the surface and I really hope I'm going to be able to do some more work on it afterwards. And if there's anybody out there who played football during this period, 60s to date, I'd love to hear from you.
By the end of the 20th century, women were exercising, practicing sport, and competing in almost all categories. But the rise of extreme sports ripped open that old wound and raised fresh concerns over women's participation. Boxing was the last of the so-called traditional sports to open its doors to women, because it was always considered too violent. The idea of women fighting, punching, and bleeding was simply too outrageous. Its governing body, the British Ladies Boxing Association, wasn't even formed until 1993, which was still 3 years before the Amateur Boxing Association of England lifted its ban on women fighters in 1996. 1996. But snowboarding, skateboarding, BMX racing, and parkour accepted the danger associated with boxing and turned it up to 11. Now, athletes weren't just getting punched in the face, they were also launching themselves off mountains and rooftops, and women wanted in on the action. Scottish lassies have worked hard to make a name for themselves in a variety of extreme sports, and while the number of girls and women joining them is still relatively low, they're inspiring, showing sporting hopefuls and skeptics alike exactly what they're capable of. The accessibility of Munros up and down the country is probably what makes mountain bike racing a good fit for Scotland. Up-and-coming racer Isla Short earned her stripes during British and World Championships, and she placed 5th in the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games in 2018. She's aware that female athletes can still be judged on the way they look, and not the way they perform. Her compatriot Lee Craigie is nothing short of heroic. She didn't even start racing until she was 26, which seems ancient in terms of professional sporting timelines. Nonetheless, she's flattened the competition, and to share her love and excitement for this high adrenaline sport, she's opened the Adventure Syndicate to encourage more women and girls into mountain biking. Equally inspiring is Scottish BMX champion Mia Payton, who, despite criticism that female riders can't be as technical as the men, is showing haters that she's prepared to go head-to-head with her fellow male riders. And perhaps one of Scotland's most beloved female extreme athletes, Joanne Jojo Calderwood, is a homegrown mixed martial art fighter whose debut Scottish fight drew a crowd of more than 10,000 to the Hydro in 2017. However, let's be clear. Female athletes, up until this point, had fought for spaces in what were traditionally male-dominated sports. But there is one sport where that's not the case. Roller derby has undergone a couple of revivals since it began in Depression-era America. Co-ed, played on a bank track, and highly theatrical. Roller derby 2.0 of the 70s was primarily about entertainment, not showcasing athleticism. That version came and went, and it was resurrected yet again in Austin, Texas in the early noughties as a full-contact, female-only sport. Like skateboarding and BMX riding, roller derby is a sport as well as a subculture. It attracted ex-punks, misfits, single moms, danger enthusiasts, and feminists because as a DIY endeavor, it provided a space where women were encouraged to take ownership and participate on their own terms, no matter their body shape or skating experience, and not because they met a narrow set of criteria. Celebrating all the things their mothers and grandmothers were denied, they took on pun-fueled skate names that were tongue-in-cheek, irreverent, and sometimes offensive. Names like Tartan Tearaway, Marla Mayhem, Mistress Malicious, and Mini Riot. In the beginning, men could take on support roles like refereeing, but women were the athletes, and that's what makes derby one of a few female-led sports. Although there are men's derby teams now, the sport is still dominated by women, and with the exception of synchronized swimming and rhythmic gymnastics, no other sport can claim that. For his perspective on the start of roller derby in Scotland, I asked former Glasgow roller derby referee and Team Scotland bench manager David Milligan to share with us what it was like supporting and working with a female-led sports team.
Yep, my name's David Milligan, and within roller derby my name would have been Knuckles. That's what it would have been known as. Probably about 2007 I get involved with roller derby when my wife first started going along to Glasgow roller derby because one of our friends had started it. At the start I was a referee for a few years, and then I get into bench managing and a bit of coaching. In terms of the roles that were there, I think we were just given referee roles because they needed referees. There was nothing else. And at that time, you didn't have to skate. You just walked around and signalled. To be honest, we weren't great in the rules back then either, because for us coming out, it was just new. We looked at the WFTDA rules and tried to interpret them, but without having any sort of visual clues, somebody leading the way. I'm not saying we were applying them the best ever.
You did the best you could with what you had.
Yep.
Okay. So what was it like for you then, as maybe one of a handful of men at any given point, say on a training day or at a game? What was that environment like for you?
I thought it was excellent. It was, as I say, it was a good, it'd be like going to see a female all-fronted band for me, because I go to see a lot of music, so it's the only thing I can make it akin to, and it was like a girl gang. You weren't made to feel inferior or anything like that. They needed your support and guidance as much as anything else, and certainly as my roles changed over the years, more towards the bench manager, that was probably more evident. At the start, they would look for you, they would argue with you about everything if you were a referee, but I don't think that's gender specific.
No.
I think anyone will argue with a referee.
Or perhaps even derby specific.
I think we get called blind a few times.
Maybe.
So from that, I don't think I felt that, I just felt part of the team, and I think everyone that was there at the start did feel that as part of the team. We weren't meant to feel excluded, anything like that. I suppose as time went on, and towards the end of my involvement in it, and when I was sort of benching, there's obvious times you need to be conscious of. I couldn't go into the female changing rooms and speak to the team, so you've got to have a bit of respect there. I just thought, and the speed at which the sport grew as well, I think we were fourth team in Britain, and it seemed to go really, really fast, that before we knew it there was almost 33 teams. So it was at the start of something that felt exciting, that was women led, but there was roles there for us to utilise and learn the best we could to help support.
What is it that you think is appealing to some women about roller derby?
Certainly at that time, and I'm going back to 2007, the teams, every team seemed to have a specific style to and makeup of women that were involved in it. So if we take London Roller Girls for example, they were all reasonably academic, working within London and doing good jobs. So I found them quite serious, good fun, but quite serious. London Rock and Rollers were all, as the name suggests, all sort of ex-punk subculture,
a little more edgy,
edgy. In Glasgow, most of the women at the start were all mothers, and it was a time off for them. So it was like girl gang is the only way I can describe it for them. So the appeal was that there was other women there to support them. There was other women teaching them. There was the DIY aesthetic, which is on the back of punk rock, which a lot of people were into anyway. They had the opportunity to design posters, they were building it from the ground up, get their own support, get people along, selling t-shirts, making t-shirts, modifying t-shirts. It became all consuming for them. So there's a definite appeal. I think anything, if you substituted anything in that, you know, whether it's music, whether it's, I suppose subcultures now aren't so much there, but scootering, anything like that, it becomes all consuming. So there's the appeal there. I definitely think for younger women coming through, that suddenly you're joining a club or you're going along to something where there's a lot of women, you've suddenly now got a lot of new friends, or there'll be cliques within that where you can then, you've got a new social life, everything, it's like opening up a brand new world to you. So I think there is the appeal there for that. I think one of the interesting ones for me was when I was down in London and we were going to play London Rock and Rollers, and I think it's York Hall is the old boxing hall, and it was out there. So we were all coming from central London out to it, and when you got on the train, anyone that looked weird, funky, cool was going to it.
You knew that you could follow them and you were both going to the same place.
You could pick them out, and when we got there, they were all getting off at the same stop and they were all going to it, which for London I think is really good, because it's a lot of the time it's quite a diverse culture down there, so to pick out the individuals and you knew that they were going to the same thing as you, and supporting the women there, and they made favourites, there was a lot of posters, things like that. It was good.
At its heart, roller derby is a DIY endeavour, and when I say endeavour, I do mean it. It's sport plus. It's a business in most instances that has to run like a business, so it needs all of the support networks and elements, like you were saying, like PR and fundraising, and events committees and discipline committees and board of directors and all the rest of it. So there's that investment that qualifies you to show up for the rest of it. It's not an one or the other, it always had to be both. So you mentioned there that you were also bench manager for Team Scotland.
Yep.
And that was at the very beginning of when world champs were even put into motion. So was it the first world champs that you were a bench manager for Scotland for?
2011.
2011.
In Canada. I think we'd just started having home teams, and I'd said before I quit I wouldn't mind bench managing one of the home teams in terms of the mini tournaments that we have, which I did. Every intention of stopping, and then moved into that. So from there, after doing Glasgow for, I can't remember how long, I think it was a couple of years I did Glasgow, and then it came up for the Scotland, went for that, and then had the opportunity to go across with the Scottish team. Now that was pretty much like something out of a movie. I think turning up at the hotel, and there's, what was there, 13 other teams there, so there's at least 20 of the girls there, so 200, so you're talking probably about 300 people in a hotel, all there for the roller derby.
Oh my goodness.
So it just felt intense straight away, in a good way. When you turned up for the tournament, the actual World Cup, it was out at a warehouse, and there was people queued up. There was people who couldn't get tickets for the day, and they were treating you as if you were, I'm not saying a rock star, but there was people asking for your autographs.
Pretty important, anyway.
It was pretty surreal experience that you were going. And the same with the girls, they were getting asked for their autographs. I did the merch stall with Tars, and there was people coming up and just giving us money to say, can you give that to the girls, get a drink? So personally, if I remember correctly, we got 2 loads of money back, which effectively paid for the travel to go. But that was covered when you went there. Seeing how, I mean, I suppose a lot of Americans and Canadians do trace their ancestry, so Scotland were going to be a big thing for them, which it was. I think we sold out in the merch, and I can't remember if it was a day or if it was 2 days we sold out
Not
merch.
long at all.
No, not at all.
Nothing to carry back.
No, and they were still wanting, there was people wanting the tops we had been wearing and things like that. It was just really surreal, and I think when you're from Glasgow you're not really used to that. You get a bit of... So when we came back, I remember some of the girls coming off, and some of the girls, the other girls from Glasgow, met them at the airport, and they were saying, I don't want to go back to work, I still want to be a superstar.
Aww.
So it was good. In America, coming to meet us and wanting their photographs taken with Scotland.
Because it was America that won that year,
America
wasn't it?
won.
So that would have been quite a big honour.
Yep, for them to come.
For Scotland,
and I think as
yeah.
well, obviously we played America, I can't remember the exact score, but I think it was something like 376-1. But
I remember that it was a very large margin. A very large margin.
I did ask them at one point if they wanted to get in. Which they just laughed, and I think when Sarah Oates got the point for us, after the game, they came, and the girls, a couple of the girls from America came and found me and said, can you go get her? And they'd made her up a special t-shirt for it. So there's all that sort of nice thing that goes on behind it. The competitiveness is only on the track. I'm not saying that'll last forever and everybody's like that, because it doesn't matter. Obviously some people are and some people aren't, but it was a really nice gesture for them to go out their way and do that. And it was amazing. It was like being a superstar for Scotland. You felt like it. I don't think so much at the time, but looking back now, it was 2011, so we're at 8 years ago. It felt like a big thing to do.
So that sounds really significant, and happened just kind of near the end of when you were involved with roller derby. But outside of that, would you say that there's been any one or group of people or a place, or in this instance maybe an event, that you found really inspiring by working with women's roller derby?
I think the whole thing, it just was a chain reaction, I think. But with anything, I think if you've done it for so long, there's a new wave of anything that comes, and you reach a stage. I'm always looking for, right, what's next? And because it's all consuming, I mean, I think you're doing it 3 times a week. Your weekends, you may be away skating across Britain, even abroad. We went to Stuttgart, we went to Barcelona. There comes a time when you kind of go, I think I've done as much. I think the first Scottish one up in Aberdeen, I'm sure it was Aberdeen at the first tournament, and that was really good. And to see the girls for there, seeing some of the girls from Aberdeen and Dundee, I'm trying to remember some of their names, Milk, were emerging at the time I was leaving, and you knew that the new breed were going to be like even stronger, because I think with most of the girls that were in Glasgow roller derby were self-taught how to play it. There wasn't a lot of video about it at the time, so if they got any video they'd all watch it. They were writing to people and they were trying to interpret how to play the game based on emails. Whereas now, I'm not saying the internet, there's just a lot more about roller derby on the internet now, so you can pick up stuff, you can travel and learn. So I think that sort of new generation that were just behind us, or maybe just behind that, I think they've got the best opportunity to go and do it. But the spread it, I think, is inspiring in terms of, I mean, Edinburgh were just after us, and then I can't remember if Dundee or Aberdeen were just after them. So it was good to see, and then them going and training other people so that you can play them. And that sharing knowledge, I think, is really good, because if you're good at something, if you think in a professional sense, you wouldn't always want to share everything that you know, because you want to be the best at it.
You want to guard that to be the best, but what I hear you saying is that people went out of their way to train other people up to be their competitors, to pass along enough of a workable framework of skills and strategy that they could then practice all of those interpret them for the way that their team wanted to play or the way their team felt about the game, so that then you could actually book a game with them.
Yep.
Because in the beginning, there weren't that many teams to play,
No, that's
at least in
definite.
Scotland. And so over those years, what's happened is you've gotten that, and it's been a massive trickle down kind of education in roller derby throughout the UK, and then eventually a lot of folks from the US were coming through to kind of do the same. Did you notice anything Scottish about the way things were going down?
I don't know if it's Scottish so much, but I think what we met as well was, and I think there's a thing in a Scottish attitude that if someone says you can't do something, regardless of gender, you're going to make your best way of doing it.
And for her take on being a female athlete, I spoke with Zoe Neal, accomplished roller derby skater and CrossFit strong lady. And I asked her to give us some insight into her early years as an athlete and what it's like for her now.
I am Zoe, and the main sport that I practice is roller derby, which is a full contact sport on roller skates. And to supplement my training for that, I do CrossFit 3 or 4 times a week. I enjoy some snowboarding, and I ride horses when I can. That's some of the sports that I practice.
That's amazing, because I think that you do currently more sport than I've ever done combined in my life. So I'm really impressed by the sheer variety. What is it about that variety that might be appealing, or what are some of the different things that those sports do for you?
First of all, it's a real privilege to be able to play those sports. It's something I'm always aware of, is having the means and the time and people that let me just disappear off and take on another hobby. I think I've always done, I was very active as a kid, and that's just, my mum was always really active and always just pushing us into playing activities, so probably don't know any different, don't really know how to just chill out on a Sunday. Different sports give me different things, so there was a time where I wasn't doing any sport at all. I left uni and I, for whatever reason, just wasn't really into anything. I didn't have a team. I went into the gym occasionally, wasn't really loving that. We went to America, and a friend of a friend suggested that I took up roller derby. So I kind of started that to make pals. And whilst most of my friend group had left for jobs in London or moved back home after I graduated, I was kind of on a mission to find some pals. So roller derby gave me a community and a team and a bunch of people to hang out with, and some people I got on really well with, other people you don't. It's just what happens. But yeah, that's what roller derby gave me. CrossFit came from off the back of roller derby, so what a lot of people don't know, it's a really athletic sport. It's full contact, it's 2-minute high intensity, and the game itself lasts for an hour. Training is 3 times a week, and I took up CrossFit because a few of the women that I skated with supplemented their training with CrossFit, and that was a completely different kind of workout space that I've ever encountered. I turned up to CrossFit really unfit and I got the fright of my life, but I really like CrossFit because again, you were working out with other people, and it's like a class of 10 to 20. Everyone kind of cheers you on, everyone is supportive, it's a safe space. I feel like other gyms I've worked in, if you are a woman and you rock up to the weightlifting platform, for whatever reason you seem to be under the male gaze, and you get loads of unsolicited advice.
Sure. Even
Even though if you turn around and you'll see some guy using a different machine, terribly, looking like they're going to break their neck, but for some reason he's left by himself. If I just want to rock up and work out by myself quite happily,
you don't get the same.
You get somebody that wants to give you your opinion. So yeah, CrossFit was cool for that.
Okay. In my experience, when I told people that I played roller derby, I used to get a range of reactions to mostly the fact that it was a full contact sport played by only women. and that kind of idea was both horrifying and intriguing to most people, and sometimes at the same time.
Yep.
What are some of the kind of reactions that you get when you tell people that you play roller derby or do things like CrossFit?
Yeah, definitely. Most people kind of wince or
Wince,
sure. Oh, that sounds really brutal. Is that not really dangerous? Or like
Dangerous,
really
yes.
violent? Whereas in actual fact, like largely the injuries that I've had, like I've injured myself way worse, like stepping into a pothole and like rolling my ankle, or like falling off my bike on my commute. I think people are always surprised when I tell them that I play roller derby, because I have this like split personality, whereas if you meet me in like a working environment or like out on the weekend, I'll be wearing like a fancy dress and like full makeup, and I'm incredibly small as well. Like I'm
Small but powerful.
under 5 foot tall, so I'm everyone's like, oh, okay, really? Like I think they just assume because I'm like I look cute and I don't know, I don't seem like an athlete, I think is the bottom line. And also they just get really concerned for my well-being, whereas actually I kind of just like laugh to myself, because I quite happily just like knock somebody into a wall. But this is like it's quite fun just to change their perceptions.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that we need more of that, because I think for like women in sport especially, for whatever reason, like it seems like you need to have somebody's permission to do the sport.
Right.
Like you, for whatever reason, you might not have enough confidence, or you're like, when you start, you're unsure. And I feel like we live in a culture where like men do the rugby and men will box and they will fight, and like from a very young age, boys are brought up to like play sport and engage in sport, whereas girls, certainly when I was growing up, was like, yeah, we're going to play netball and do step aerobics. Not in my family, but like at school, that was kind of the message, and you just get treated differently. And then this sort of cycle of starts where, if you do turn up for a sport, you're like, oh, I've got no reason to be here, I'm rubbish at this, like I'm not able to do this, I can't do this, like I can't play this, or can't do that movement. In actual fact, you can, and you will. You just need to practice it and like show up, and also just like own your own space. But I don't know, I feel like sport at school is just like guys just marching to the front, like elbows out, like charging in, and then for whatever reason you're just kind of standing there like, okay, cool.
Were there any people that you looked up to? Were there any sporting figures that you saw as an inspiration?
I knew of like football players. I knew about other sports, but it was all men. I knew about Olympic athletes, but they were dudes, because they were they were the people getting the media coverage. They were the people in your like kids magazine, and in Panini sticker books. It was dudes. It was all guys. It was, but the Williams sisters were like, they were on TV in the 2 weeks of the summer that Wimbledon was on, and they were winning, and then they were you watch them again, and they were like women doing awesome things. They're not the only women who were winning things at the time, but they were the athletes that were like bursting my like very sheltered like privileged bubble. I remember like being like, we changed tennis club because we were the only girls like playing tennis. Okay. So we moved to like a different tennis club. There was nobody to play tennis with.
You weren't allowed to play with the boys?
We were allowed to play with the boys, but they didn't necessarily play nice, and it wasn't like a nurturing environment to like, it's not like our coaches were like being like, come on, like, you could be the number one tennis player in Britain. They were like, boys, you go first, and like, we'll just sort of humour you on the other side. And kids are mean. Like, it just felt like it didn't have a space to like be there. And just people, they were just like, nah, you're rubbish, or like, nah, we're not pairing up with you because you are the worst person here, which is like just cruel. And basically when you're like an awkward like 11-year-old, you just want the ground to swallow you up, and you just want to go home.
I tried swimming on the high school swim team, and not only was there the mortifying experience of having to get into a bathing suit in a mixed, like in a co-ed sporting environment, right? So that was horrifically hard. But I was also horrible at swimming. After that, I went to an all-girls school, and the only sport that was on offer was field hockey, although that's just normal hockey here, right? So field hockey, lacrosse, we could play volleyball, which was obviously the US equivalent of netball, all equally painful, and didn't enjoy it. And it wasn't until I'd gone through all of those really not very nice sporting experiences that I too met roller derby in an interest of finding some pals, finding a reason to get out of the house at that particular time. And that was the changer. It wasn't the physicality of it. It wasn't anything to do with that. It was when I actually felt like I was part of a group. And that not just a group, but a group of like-minded people who were willing to try out this crazy, ridiculous thing called roller derby, which was still pretty new in the UK.
And it's a safe space. Like, you're there with other women who, you know, there's nobody there doing it necessarily better than you or like judging you, or like you could just be yourself.
I'd never been in a sport environment before where you were really encouraged to just have a shot, and if you fell over, which is what happened a lot in the beginning,
we're Bambi.
You know, you were used to taking those knocks, and it was a life changer when I could take those physical experiences and lessons and then apply them to the world outside of roller derby, and that made things sometimes a little bit easier to engage with, because you just went, right, well, if I can get smashed in the middle of training and fall over, like, I can handle this interview, you know. And
you have 20 other people at practice that are there to like scoop you up, put you back on your feet and check in that you're okay, and, you know, give you, like, empower you, and also just like congratulate you when you succeeded finally and you weren't flying on your butt.
If a woman is thinking of getting involved in sport, what kind of advice would you give her?
I think that you don't need to necessarily even find a sport. You can just be active. You can go to the gym. You can get outside. You can go for a walk. I think sport isn't for everyone, and I think within sport, you know, it's always such a shame when people leave sport early, like, you know, when they don't get on with people, like, that happens. But yeah, you just need to take that leap and try it, and then maybe try it again, and it's going to be weird and it's going to be uncomfortable, but then it'll be great. I think it's just important to put aside the time and try it, and don't be like, you should never feel like you don't have a reason to be there, or you shouldn't be there. Like, everybody started somewhere. Everybody you're probably training with, like, was you, like, at some point. And like, just get stuck in. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, which I know is incredibly hard, because it's a nerve, like, rocking up to like a new training session, or a new, like, if you're a new gym or a new class or whatever, is really intimidating. And you're not instantly going to find your BFF.
No.
And you're not instantly, like, you need to take responsibility for your own enjoyment in the sport as well. So you definitely turn up, like, you know, people will say hello and welcome you, and it will be great. But you have to take the first step, and, like,
you have to go.
You have to go.
Yeah.
It's definitely not easy, but ultimately, I've yet to find somebody that has regretted that decision. Like, even, you know, you don't have to do a sport forever. It might naturally run its course. You might, you know, do it for a period of time and then leave it. That's cool, but you still benefit from it. You'll still, you know, look back at it and be like, that was cool, like, I really enjoyed that. And then you might, like, try something else, or that, like, habit, I guess, that you develop, like, it sticks with you. Like, people, I've got so many friends that played roller derby, like yourself, for like so many years, they're now hitting the gym. They're like CrossFit athletes, or they've gone on to do like different team sports, or they're now running marathons. It's just like starting that habit, and then, you know, once you meet people doing it, they will empower you. You can like learn from them and like just share that, have that shared experience. And even if it like, you know, you're like, cool, that's not for me, like you might end up having some pals for like a really long time, which is great.
That's also a really good and viable outcome, is that you've gained some friends.
Yeah, you've gained some friends, your like mental health will improve, your physical health will improve, like, you know, schlepping it into work every day, you might find that actually the one thing that gets you through that day is the fact that you know that you're going to that training session at that end. Mm-hmm. So it just makes the outside world a bit more manageable.
By no means comprehensive, this episode is meant to introduce you to the history of Scottish women involved in sport and encourage you to get more active, to try out a team sport, or at the very least, support local and legendary Scottish female athletes. Huge thanks to the team at Sunny G Radio, Heather, Jim and Steg, for all their support. Also, a massive thank you to this episode's contributors: Karen Grunwell from the University of Stirling, David Milligan and Zoe Neal, for taking the time to talk and for sharing their experiences with us. Thank you to this episode's musical contributors: Lee Rosevere, AA Alto, Audio Binger, Lobo Loco, and Floating Pictures of the World. Finally, thank you to Lisa Donati from Giat Laldi for the fierce social media image. Thanks, everybody! Want to listen to the show again? Head over to sunnyg.com/Aye Lassie for all the Aye Lassie episodes, as well as full transcripts, citations, and extra materials. Or check out the Aye Lassie Twitter, that's at Aye Lassie Radio, and let us know what you think.